At a peaceful diner on the outskirts of Brookhaven, a black waitress works long shifts, struggling to make ends meet with meager tips. Her aspiration to own a bakery is overshadowed by overdue bills. However, one night, a mysterious woman in a sharp suit leaves behind a crumpled $1 bill with a message that causes the waitress to hesitate. Skeptical yet holding a hint of hope, she dials the number on the note. Unbeknownst to her, this call will unlock the door to a life she never believed possible. The hum of the flickering neon sign outside Willow Street Diner casts a muted red glow onto the cracked pavement. Outside, the air was heavy with the aromas of city life, hot asphalt, gasoline, and a distant scent of fried food wafting from a food cart down the street. Inside, the air felt warmer and thicker, carrying the scents of cheap coffee, grease, and the faint residue of cigarette smoke lingering on the regulars' clothes. The diner was currently quiet, the usual late-night patrons having dwindled to a few weary souls nursing their last cups of coffee before heading back into the night. Aaliyah Brooks wiped down the counter with slow, deliberate strokes, her body aching from the double shift she had barely survived. Her feet throbbed within her worn sneakers, and the muscles in her lower back protested from hours of standing. Yet, the exhaustion was nothing new. It was just another day, another long night at Willow Street Diner, where the fluorescent lights buzzed like a persistent headache and the old jukebox in the corner sat silent, gathering dust. She glanced at the clock above the kitchen window. 12:43 a.m. Almost done. Just a little longer. The bell above the door jingled, shattering the stillness of the nearly empty diner. Aaliyah hardly looked up at first, likely another trucker in search of a late-night snack or one of the regulars coming for their usual fare. However, the moment her eyes were lifted, she felt a shift in the air. The woman who entered was unlike anyone who typically passed through those doors, tall, poised, and effortlessly elegant. She exuded an air of quiet authority, the kind of presence that, while not demanding attention, commanded it nonetheless. Her impeccably tailored black suit hugged her slender frame, the fabric catching the dim light like something far too luxurious to belong in a place like this. A diamond bracelet sparkled against her skin as she adjusted the sleek leather handbag on her shoulder. Her hair, a cascade of silver-streaked curls, was pulled back into a low bun, accentuating the sharpness of her cheekbones and the unwavering focus in her deep-set eyes. Aaliyah recognized wealth. It wasn't unusual in a city like Brookhaven, where skyscrapers towered over neighborhoods like hers, separating the affluent from those who served them. Yet, there was something unique about this woman. She was not just wealthy, she was powerful. For a moment, Aaliyah hesitated, gripping the damp cloth in her hands before forcing herself to move. She tucked the rag into the pocket of her apron and grabbed her notepad, making her way over. "Good evening, ma'am. What can I get started for you?" The woman barely acknowledged her, flipping open the menu in a slow, deliberate manner, scanning it with an expression that gave nothing away. When she finally spoke, her voice was smooth and measured, grilled cheese and water. That was it, no extras, no substitutions, just a simple, almost childlike meal from a woman who seemed accustomed to dining in five-star restaurants with plates too small to justify the price. Aaliyah noted it down, coming right up. As she moved toward the kitchen, she stole another glance at the woman, who sat perfectly still in the corner booth with her back straight and hands gently resting on the table, not scrolling through a phone, not tapping impatiently, just waiting as if she had nowhere to go, nothing urgent to do. It was unsettling. Aaliyah didn't linger on it. She had work to do. The grilled cheese took less than 5 minutes to prepare, buttered bread crisped to a golden brown, cheese melted just right, the kind of simple comfort food that suited a place like Willow Street Diner. Carefully, she plated it, added a glass of water, and carried it over to the woman's table. "Enjoy," she said, placing it down. The woman didn't acknowledge her, didn't say thank you. She merely picked up the sandwich and took a small, methodical bite. Aaliyah exhaled through her nose, stifling the urge to roll her eyes as she walked away. She had dealt with people like this before, wealthy and entitled, those who barely recognized the servers who brought them their food. They lived in another world, one where people like her existed only in the background. Minutes slipped by in near silence. The woman ate slowly, drawing out her meal in precise, calculated bites. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin, folded it neatly, and slid out of the booth with the same effortless grace with which she had entered. Aaliyah had already turned back to the counter, half lost in thoughts of finally getting home, when she heard the gentle rustling of cash being placed on the table. She waited until the door jingled shut before moving to clear the plate. Her fingers moved instinctively, scooping up the napkin, the empty glass of water. Then she froze. A single crumpled dollar bill lay in the center of the table. Her stomach twisted, $1 as a tip. Aaliyah felt the heat rising in her neck, frustration simmering beneath her weariness. $1 from a woman wearing a watch that likely cost more than Aaliyah's monthly rent. But as she picked up the bill, her irritation flickered into something else. There, scrawled across the surface in neat, slanted handwriting, were the words, "The biggest opportunities sometimes start small. Call this number." Aaliyah stared at it, her pulse quickening. She glanced toward the window, catching a fleeting glimpse of the sleek black car as it vanished down the street, the taillights glowing red in the distance before fading into the darkness. Her fingers tightened around the bill. What kind of person leaves a note like this? And more importantly, should she call? Aaliyah remained at the counter long after the last customer departed. The diner now felt eerily silent, with only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the flickering overhead light. The $1 bill lay on the worn countertop before her, its creased edges slightly curled. She ran her thumb over the inked words once more, her mind caught between suspicion and curiosity. This had to be a prank. Wealthy individuals didn't leave cryptic notes for struggling waitresses in run-down diners. Could it be some kind of setup? A scam that lured desperate people in with false promises? Yet something about the woman, the way she carried herself, how deliberate her every move had been, told Aaliyah this wasn't random. She glanced at the clock. 1:27 a.m. Too late, or perhaps too early to make a call like this. But the thought of returning home to another overdue bill, another night filled with worries over affording her mother's medication next month, made her grip the phone a little tighter. Before she could second-guess herself, she dialed the number. It rang once, twice, then a click, a breath of silence, and finally a smooth, steady voice. "Aaliyah," the woman said, as if she had anticipated the call. "I was beginning to wonder if you would." Aaliyah's mouth went dry. Who is this?" A soft chuckle came from the other end. "My name is Naomi Sinclair. I take it you found my message." Aaliyah swallowed hard. "Yeah, I found it. What is this, a game?" "No," Naomi replied simply. "It's an opportunity, but only if you're willing to seize it." Aaliyah hesitated. "Why me?" A pause followed. "Because I saw something in you." Aaliyah let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah? And what exactly did you see? A broke waitress working herself to the bone for scraps?" Naomi's voice remained steady. "I saw someone who never stops, no matter how tough things get. Someone who treats every customer with kindness, even when they don't deserve it. Someone who has been overlooked and underestimated, Someone who reminds me of myself a long time ago. Aaliyah's breath caught slightly at that last part, but she buried it down. This was absurd. People like Naomi Sinclair didn't help people like her. There had to be a catch. Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but I don't have time for cryptic riddles, Aaliyah said, rubbing her temple. Either tell me what this is about or don't waste my time. Naomi exhaled softly, as though pleased by the challenge. Meet me tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I'll send you the address. Aaliyah frowned. And if I don't? Then you don't, Naomi responded simply. But if you're calling me at 1:30 in the morning, something tells me you don't have much to lose. Aaliyah clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the phone. She despised that the woman was right. A pause stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then Naomi spoke again, her voice softer. You deserve more than just surviving, Aaliyah. The line went dead. Aaliyah stared at the phone in her hand, her heart racing in her chest. Tomorrow morning. She should ignore it. She should go home, sleep, and pretend this never happened. But she knew she wouldn't, because for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at her and seen something more. Morning arrived too soon. Aaliyah barely slept, her mind turning over every possibility, every worst-case scenario. By the time her alarm blared at 7 a.m., she was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment, the peeling paint, the water stains creeping along the corners, and the soft wheeze of her mother's breathing from the next room. It all served as a reminder of why she was even considering meeting Naomi Sinclair in the first place. She pulled herself out of bed, dressing in the nicest thing. She owned that wasn't a waitress uniform, a fitted navy blouse, black slacks that were slightly too long, and a pair of flats that had seen better days. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked foreign, her tired eyes and the set of her jaw resembling someone bracing for a fight. Maybe she was. By 8:45, she was on the train, gripping the metal pole as the city blurred by. The address Naomi had texted led to a part of Brookhaven Aaliyah had only ever viewed from afar, where the buildings weren't just tall. They were glass and steel monuments to wealth she had never encountered. As she stepped out of the station, the world felt transformed. The streets were spotless. The air smelled of fresh coffee instead of gasoline, and the people walked with an ease that came from never having to worry about making rent. She had never felt so out of place. The building Naomi had directed her to was impossibly sleek, reflecting the entire skyline in its tinted windows. The moment Aaliyah stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop, the cool, sterile air conditioning replacing the heat of the streets. A woman at the front desk, blonde and stiff-backed with a practiced corporate smile, barely spared her a glance before her eyes flickered over Aaliyah's outfit. It was subtle, the slight lift of an eyebrow, the way her smile didn't fully reach her eyes. Aaliyah recognized that look. She had seen it before. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Her voice clipped, polite in a way that implied, "You don't belong here." Aaliyah lifted her chin. "I have a meeting with Naomi Sinclair." The woman's smile faltered for just a moment. "And you are Aaliyah Brooks." Something shifted. The receptionist's eyes darted to the computer screen, her fingers tapping quickly across the keys. Whatever she saw made her hesitate. Then, with noticeably less enthusiasm, she gestured toward the elevators. "Top floor. Miss Sinclair is expecting you." Aaliyah didn't thank her. She simply turned on her heel and stepped into the elevator, feeling the weight of the receptionist's stare on her back the whole time. As the door slid shut, she took a deep breath, her pulse echoing in her ears. Top floor. The ride up was smooth, too smooth. as though the elevator wasn't even moving. When the doors finally opened, she entered a space that didn't appear to be an office at all. It felt too open. Two bright, floor-to-ceiling windows spanned the entire length of the room, offering a panoramic view of the city below. Sleek, modern furniture stood in deliberate arrangements, exemplifying the kind of expensive minimalism that screamed money. Standing by the window was Naomi Sinclair. She turned at the sound of the elevator, her composed expression from last night's visit still intact. But here in this environment, she fit. She belonged in this space in a way that Aaliyah had never felt anywhere. "Aaliyah," Naomi said, gesturing for her to come closer. "I'm glad you came." Aaliyah moved forward warily, glancing around as she approached. "Didn't have much of a choice." Naomi's lips twitched as if she had expected that response. "Would you like something to drink?" Aaliyah shook her head. "I'd like answers." Naomi nodded approvingly as if she appreciated that Aaliyah didn't waste time. "All right then, let's get straight to the point." She moved toward a sleek black desk, picked up a folder, and placed it on the glass surface. "I told you last night that I see potential in you, and I meant it." She gestured toward the folder. "I want to invest in you, Aaliyah, but I need to know, if money weren't an obstacle, what would you do?" Aaliyah's throat tightened at that question, the one she had forced herself to stop considering long ago since it had only led to disappointment. But standing here before Naomi Sinclair, with the city sprawled beneath them, it felt tangible. Her fingers curled into tight fists at her sides. She didn't want to voice it, saying it would make it real, and real things could be taken away. But Naomi was waiting. "I'd open a bakery," Aaliyah finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Something small, a place that feels like home." For the first time, Naomi smiled, not the small, controlled smirk from the night before, but something genuine. "Then that's what we'll do." Aaliyah blinked. What?" "You heard me," Naomi said as she sat down. "But this won't be a handout. If you want this, you'll have to work for it. Every decision, every sacrifice, it's yours to make. I'll provide the funding, the guidance, the connections, but you'll build it." Aaliyah stared at her. "Why?" Naomi leaned slightly forward, her expression inscrutable. "Because someone once gave me a chance when no one else would, and I've spent a long time waiting to pay that forward to the right person." Aaliyah's heart raced. This was insane. This couldn't be real. Yet, her mind flashed to her mother's prescriptions, to her exhaustion after each shift, to the tiny persistent dream she had. Shoved into the darkest corners of her mind, too afraid to confront it. "I need to know what the catch is," she finally said. Naomi tilted her head. "The catch is that it won't be easy. There will be setbacks, risks, and if you give up, the deal is off." Aaliyah clenched her jaw. She had spent her whole life surviving things that weren't easy. She had already lost so much. Could she truly afford to turn this down? The answer was terrifyingly simple. "I'm in," she replied. Naomi nodded once. "Then let's get to work." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Naomi wasted no time, nor did Aaliyah. There were no lengthy meetings or sugar-coated pep talks, just immediate action. Naomi gave her a list, not a business plan or a neatly laid-out blueprint, just a list of things she had to figure out herself. Find a location, research suppliers, outline a budget, develop a brand. "You build it," Naomi had stated, and she meant it. Aaliyah dove into it with an intensity she didn't know she possessed. Mornings were spent scouring the city, looking at potential storefronts, comparing rental prices, trying to envision what her place could become. Afternoons were filled with research, calls to distributors, meetings with local farmers, and endless notes scrawled into a worn-out notebook. At night, she experimented with recipes in her tiny kitchen, flour dusting every available surface, the aroma of vanilla and cinnamon pervading the air as she tested and retested every idea she had ever dreamed of. But it wasn't a smooth journey. The first space she found, a small but charming storefront in a neighborhood she adored, was snatched up before she could even make an offer. The second landlord she approached took one look at her and dismissed her before she could utter a word, his tone dripping with condescension as he remarked that this area might not be the best fit for her. She had experienced it before, the polite rejection, the unspoken, "You don't belong here." It stung. She shared her frustrations with Naomi the next day, expecting outrage or even an offer for her to step in and handle it. But Naomi simply observed her with that same unreadable expression before stating, "Then find another way." So, she did. She continued searching and pushing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of dead ends, she discovered it, a small brick storefront on the corner of a quiet street with large windows allowing streams of golden light to flood in. A warm space. The rent was higher than she had anticipated, but still manageable. The lease agreement was harsh, filled with clauses she barely understood. The next morning, Naomi handed her a folder. "Your first real lesson in business," she affirmed, flipping through the pages. "Contracts can kill you faster than failure. Read everything." After 3 days, countless Google searches, and an incredibly long phone call with a lawyer that Naomi had introduced her to, Aaliyah signed the lease. She had a location, a step that should have felt victorious. Instead, it felt like stepping off a precipice because now it was real, and real things could fall apart. The weeks melted into one another. Construction crews gutted the space, stripping walls bare and tearing up floors. Aaliyah fought tooth and nail over every detail, from the kitchen tiles to the color of the chairs. She learned quickly that nothing ever went according to plan. The plumbing required more work than anticipated, delaying everything by weeks. A shipment of baking equipment arrived damaged, forcing her to scramble for replacements. The stress was suffocating. The pressure was unlike anything she had ever endured. One night, after yet another unforeseen expense nearly derailed everything, Aaliyah sat on the floor of the unfinished bakery, her back against the wall, staring at the half-finished space around her. The numbers weren't adding up. No matter how she twisted and stretched the budget, she was rapidly running out of money. Her phone buzzed, a text from Naomi, "Success doesn't come without struggle. Keep going. You're closer than you think." Aaliyah let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the phone. She wasn't going to quit. She couldn't. So, she adjusted. She cut whatever she could, pushed deadlines, and negotiated harder. She poured everything into this, and then, after months filled with exhaustion, sacrifice, and moments where she nearly convinced herself she wasn't good enough or ready, the bakery was completed. Her bakery, Hearth Bakery. The name shone in elegant lettering above the door, marking the culmination of a dream she had scarcely allowed herself to believe in. The night before the grand opening, she stood in the center of the space, gazing at her creation. The shelves were stocked, the counters sparkled, and the aromas of fresh bread and warm spices filled the air. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. On the morning of the grand opening, Aaliyah stood behind the counter of Hearth Bakery, gripping the edge as she willed herself to breathe. The sign outside gleamed under the soft morning light, the lettering bold and real, hers. She had spent the last several hours ensuring everything was flawless. The glass display case was lined with rows of golden croissants, perfectly glazed danishes, and soft sugar-dusted babkas, while the fragrant scents of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh bread swirled through the air, warm and inviting. The small and intimate cafe tables sat beneath hanging Edison lights, casting a golden glow over the space. Every detail was intentional, every corner a manifestation of the dream she had built from scratch. Yet, doubt weighed heavily on her chest. What if no one came? What if all of this, the months of sacrifice, the late nights, the risks, culminated in nothing but empty chairs and wasted food? The bell above the door jingled. Aaliyah snapped her head up, her heart racing as the first customer stepped in, a woman and her young son, bundled in their coats, their eyes scanning the bakery with curiosity. Then another person entered, followed by two more, and just like that, the place was buzzing. By noon, the bakery was alive with families gathered at tables, office workers stopping for coffee and pastries, and children pressing their noses against the glass case, eyes wide with delight. Aaliyah hardly had a moment to process it all, her hands moving instinctively, pouring coffee, plating pastries, smiling at every new face that walked through the door. Then, just as the lunch rush began to settle, the door swung open again. Naomi Sinclair entered, but she wasn't alone. A woman stood beside her, around Naomi's age, with a composed yet softer posture and a warm expression. Two children trailed after them, their excitement clear as they took in the space. Naomi, impeccably dressed in her usual suit, surveyed the bakery with a slow, deliberate gaze before turning her attention to Aaliyah. "You actually showed up," Aaliyah said, breathless from the morning's chaos. Naomi's lips curved slightly. "I wouldn't miss it." The woman at Naomi's side stepped forward. "My name is Camille," she introduced, her voice gentle. "Naomi told me about you, about what you've built here." Aaliyah frowned slightly, glancing at Naomi, who simply tilted her head, as if waiting for her to connect the dots. Camille smiled, a quiet knowing expression on her face. "Years ago, when I had nothing, Naomi did for me what she's done for you. She gave me a chance, a second shot at building something of my own." She gestured around the bakery. "And now you're doing the same." Aaliyah's throat tightened. She was at a loss for words. Naomi, watching her closely, reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Without saying a word, she placed it on the counter. Aaliyah stared at it, her pulse racing. "What is this?" she asked, though she wasn't certain she wanted the answer. Naomi simply nodded toward it. "Open it." With careful hands, Aaliyah peeled back the flap, withdrawing the crisp white paper inside. Her eyes scanned the words, once, twice, her breath catching in her throat. The bakery, the loans, the investment Naomi had made, paid in full. Her hands trembled. I don't understand." Naomi leaned in slightly, her voice softer than before. "You built this, Aaliyah. You earned this. I just gave you a push. Now it's truly yours." Aaliyah felt it, all the weight crashing into her at once, the exhaustion, the fear, the relentless struggle, and now, for the first time in her life, freedom. Her vision blurred. Her fingers gripped the paper so tightly it crinkled at the edges. The bakery around her faded, the voices of customers turning into distant noise. It was too much. It was everything. A choked laugh slipped past her lips as she looked back at Naomi, her eyes sparkling with something unspoken. "Thank you," she whispered. Naomi simply nodded. "Just promise me one thing." Aaliyah swallowed hard. "What?" Naomi glanced around the bakery, where customers sat with warm pastries, where laughter filled the air, where something real, Something lasting had been created. One day, she said, "Find someone else to give a chance to." Aaliyah nodded because she already knew she would. Months passed, and Hearth Bakery became more than a business. It transformed into a part of the community. Mornings rang with the sounds of clinking coffee cups, quiet conversations between old friends, and the occasional burst of laughter from a mother attempting to corral her sugar-high toddler. The fragrances of fresh bread and warm spices lingered in the air, wrapping around every person who entered like a familiar embrace. Aaliyah had never known a place could feel so alive. Naomi continued to visit from time to time, always sharp, always observing. She never sought credit or recognition. She would sit in the corner with her coffee, flipping through emails on her phone, occasionally lifting her gaze to study Aaliyah as if measuring her growth, not merely as a businesswoman, but as something more, someone evolving. Yet true to her word, Naomi remained in the background. This was Aaliyah's now, and Aaliyah honored her promise, too. One chilly afternoon, just as she was about to lock up, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, expecting a late customer, but saw instead a girl in her early 20s, wrapped in a thin jacket, her dark curls tucked under a knitted beanie. The girl's expression was tentative and worn in a way Aaliyah recognized all too well. "Sorry," the girl mumbled, shifting on her feet. "I know you're closing, but I saw the sign, help wanted." Aaliyah studied her. There it was, that same look, the one she had worn the night Naomi had left that $1 bill on her table. She glanced at the now hiring sign taped to the window, the ink slightly smudged from the cold. It wasn't merely a job listing. It was a door cracked open just enough for someone to enter. Aaliyah set down the rag she had been holding and stepped closer. "Have you ever worked in a bakery before?" The girl shook her head, clearly bracing for rejection. "No, but I can learn. I just need a chance." Aaliyah exhaled slowly, her mind flashing back to Naomi's words, "One day, find someone else to give a chance to." She looked back at the girl and then at the framed $1 bill hanging on the wall behind the counter, the words inscribed still clear, "The biggest opportunities sometimes start small." Aaliyah smiled. "Come in," she said. "Let's talk." Join us in sharing meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.